Hello, my name is Simon Gilbody. I'm Professor of Psychological Medicine at the University of York, and together with my colleague, Professor David Eakers, I'm the Chief Investigator of the MHARG BASIL study. We prepared a short video where I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the study. In order to cover all the points that I think are important, I prepared some post-its to make sure I don't forget anything. So, here's my first post-it. What is BASIL and why is it important right now? Well, BASIL stands for Behavioural Activation and Social Isolation. And we think this is an important study. We've designed it in response to the COVID pandemic. People with multiple long-term conditions are still shielding because they're very worried about contracting COVID. And we are concerned that this is disruptive to their daily routines and makes them very vulnerable to becoming lonely and developing clinical depression. If you have long-term conditions, the combination of depression alongside those long-term conditions is detrimental to your physical health, to your quality of life, and some research suggests can increase the chances of you dying from long-term conditions. So this combination of depression alongside long-term conditions is something that we worry about, and we should seek to prevent the occurrence of depression wherever that's possible. And we know from the early phases of the COVID-19 pandemic that there is going to be a potential increase in rates of depression and loneliness for people who are shielding. So in order to try and mitigate these psychological impacts, we have taken a credible intervention and we want to undertake a fair test, some rigorous research to help us understand whether that works. And if it works, then that will be useful for the NHS in dealing with the next stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's BASIL. My next post-it is about behavioural activation. What is BA? Well, behavioural activation, BA, is right there in the title of the BASIL study. Behavioural activation is a brief form of talking therapy, and it's based on some very sound psychological principles. And it's been around for many years, and we know from research that we've conducted and research conducted by others that it works very well for older people in both treating depression but also preventing depression amongst those who are at the highest risk. Behavioural activation works by focusing on maintaining people's daily routines, because we know that what people do influences how they feel. When people and their daily routines are disrupted, then there is a danger that they move into levels of inactivity and they lose the reinforcing aspects of everyday activities and become depressed. So people work collaboratively with a behavioural therapist to schedule activities and to reintroduce new activities and maintain daily schedules. We know that it works for older people in certain situations, but we don't know whether it's going to work in the context of older people with multiple long-term conditions who are currently shielding. So we seek to extend the research evidence to decide whether this is an intervention that could be potentially used in the global and the NHS's response to COVID-19. What about the BASIL trial? What does that look like? Well, we don't know if behavioural activation works for this population, so we need to conduct a fair test in the form of a randomised controlled trial. So according to the play of chance, people will be either allocated to receive the experimental intervention, which is behavioural activation, which we have specifically adapted for older people with long-term conditions who are currently undergoing shielding as a consequence of COVID-19. And people will be either allocated to that intervention or the usual care that they would receive within primary care and with reference to different aspects of social services that people might be keyed into. So behavioural activation versus usual care. The outcomes that we're interested in are levels of depression and also people's experience of loneliness. And we will study that in the short term and in the medium term and in the longer term. We are currently in the midst of delivering a pilot trial to test out whether that's a feasible trial to be delivered in the NHS, and it's going really well. We're recruiting very well, and we've learned a lot about the intervention, and we have designed some self-help materials to support that intervention, and we are now confident that we can move on to the next stage of our research programme, which is a much larger study recruited in many, many sites in the NHS throughout the UK. We are confident that we'll be able to move on to that full-scale trial because the pilot trial has taught us so much and has enabled us to think about how we can successfully run this trial in the NHS. So, who is in the BASIL team? Well, the BASIL study is led by my research group, the Mental Health and Addictions Research Group, based at the University of York. We're a group of people, many of whom have clinical backgrounds, but all of whom are very experienced researchers in developing brief psychological interventions for use in the NHS and the evaluation of those psychological interventions in the context of rigorous experiments, randomised controlled trials. We work in collaboration with the York Trials Unit to ensure that we can access the best scientific methods to answer that question. And we are a collaboration of several universities based in the north of England, and got them all listed here on the back of our materials. So I must mention colleagues in the University of Keele, colleagues in Age UK, colleagues at the University of Leeds and the University of Manchester, and at the Hull York Medical School. And we're also working in collaboration with our lead NHS site, which is a large mental health trust based in the North East and in North Yorkshire, and that is the Tees, Esk and Wear Valleys NHS Foundation Trust. Okay, so we are a collaborative team, strong record of delivering large-scale trials of brief psychological interventions in the NHS, including trials of behavioural activation. We've adapted this intervention for use in the NHS for people who are currently shielding by reason of long-term conditions. Thank you. My name is Simon Gilbody from the Mental Health and Addictions Research Group at the University of York, Chief Investigator of the BASIL study.